Hello, my name is Matthew Costa. I'm a postdoctoral scholar at the Center for Climate Change Impacts and Adaptation at Scripps Institution of Oceanography, University of California, San Diego. And today I'll be talking to you about the global issue of mangrove deforestation. So what this globe represents is the global distribution in purple or pink on the subtropical and tropical coasts around the world. So first I'll discuss what are mangroves, and then we'll talk about what is their global status around the world. So mangrove is a swamp. That is a type of wetland that's dominated by trees, and specifically a type of swamp that lives in salty environments, so the marine coastal environment. The different mangrove species are found in different, what we call intertidal zones, so different locations in the intertidal zone. The red mangroves, as you can see here, with their prop roots, help them live in the low intertidal, closer to the ocean, whereas other species live higher up in the intertidal zone, such as the black mangrove, whose above ground root structure is called pneumatophores. You can see here, these are found higher up in the intertidal zone. Not just the trees have this sort of intertidal zonation, but the creatures that live on all of these roots show this zonation as well. So the roots of mangroves create a habitat for an amazing and beautiful diversity of encrusting invertebrates, algae, and microorganisms. And these organisms also are zoned in the intertidal on their root habitats, which is really amazing. So even though there are only a few different mangrove species of trees in any given location, the abundance and diversity of other organisms is incredibly high. So we have encrusting invertebrates and algae on the roots, scavenging and predatory crabs, also predators from the air, such as birds from land and ocean, as well as a diversity of juvenile fish and other marine organisms that use the mangroves as nursery habitats. All of these different kinds of diversity, as well as many, many microorganisms you're just beginning to understand, are housed in the mangrove ecosystem. Unfortunately, these incredible and diverse ecosystems are being lost rapidly around the world. This time lapse shows over 30 years the replacement of mangrove and coastal forest ecosystems in Quintana Roo, Mexico. So what do we know about this loss of mangrove ecosystems around the world? It's been estimated that by the end of the 20th century, more than 35% of mangrove area was lost globally. During the late 20th century, these rates of mangrove loss were observed to be highest in the Americas, actually reaching rates of up to 2% of global mangrove area lost per year. And where one of the major risks, and especially in the Americas, in some places, were the conversion to shrimp pond aquaculture, as you can see in this picture. Today, it's estimated that about 137,000 square kilometers of mangrove remains around the world. And in the last 20 years, since 2000, the shifts in global deforestation trends there's been a shift that's occurred toward Southeast Asia. So if you look at this graph, where Southeast Asia has the most red, not only in total mangrove loss in hectares, and that's partly because there's just so much mangrove area in Southeast Asia, but also mangrove loss as a percentage of original area. As you can see here, in both cases, you have a lot of red in this part of the world, showing highest rates of mangrove loss in Southeast Asia. This graph gives you a better idea of what are the drivers locally and regionally in mangrove loss in different parts of the world since 2000, where we have, there's a lot of information here. So these squiggly lines at the top and at the side represent the longitudinal and latitudinal distribution of mangrove deforestation around the world. What I'd really like you to focus on is these colored squares on the map. So the colored squares represent sort of mangrove cover around the world, and the color of the squares represent the major cause, the major driver of mangrove deforestation in that region, where red squares represent replacement of mangroves for settlement, orange represents the replacement due to production of commodities, such as for agriculture or aquaculture, so fish farms, shrimp ponds, etc. Non-productive conversion represents the loss, and that's yellow, represents the loss of mangroves unintentionally due to land use changes perhaps somewhere else, as we'll discuss later. Green represents extreme weather events, such as major storms, and blue represents the loss of mangroves due to erosion. And these sort of big squares at the bottom summarize what the major drivers of mangrove loss are in different regions of the world. So C and D, these are North and South America. Here and in Oceania, you have dominating are the causes of extreme weather events and erosion. Whereas in Africa, non-productive conversion plays a bigger role. And in Southeast Asia, which again is the hotspot of mangrove area overall and also of mangrove loss, is dominated by conversion to commodities, especially today, palm oil plantations. So it's easy to imagine how conversion to a plantation or settlements could damage wetlands, such as mangroves, but also it's possible for, in the case of the yellow non-productive conversion, decisions that happen many miles away can really negatively impact mangroves on the coast. And a clear example of that is this study by some of my colleagues, Costa et al. In Mexico, where they showed that we have 4 rivers here that go into the Pacific Ocean. These top and the bottom ones have hydroelectric dams many miles upstream, which as an unintended consequence prevent a lot of sediment from reaching the coast. And as we see in this column here is showing in red, the area that is lost mangroves from the delta on the coast over several years, whereas in these dammed rivers, whereas the undammed rivers have stable coastlines. So this is an example of how these sort of non-productive conversion of mangroves can be a really big problem in coastal areas. In addition, even the loss of mangroves due to extreme weather events and erosion are related to human activities because extreme weather events are increasing in intensity due to climate change. And this is an area of mangrove dieback in Baja California, where wave and weather events have killed the fringe or the edge of the mangrove environment, and so they've died back. So these extreme weather events are increasing due to climate change, and also sea level rise is accelerating due to climate change, and as a result, mangroves that are experiencing erosion are further challenged by rising sea levels. So, why, you might be asking yourself, why should I care about these mangroves and maybe in places in part of the world that I don't even live in? Well, I think that these ecosystems are valuable in their own right, but if you need more convincing than that, there's actually something in it for us. Mangroves produce lots of what we call ecosystem services. So these are processes that are carried on by ecosystems that provide economic value to humans, and they do it for free. Mangroves support fisheries species, so species that we catch and sell and eat. They improve water quality. They foster lots of other valuable biodiversity. They counteract erosion by depositing sediment, and they protect coastal areas from the impacts of storms, saving lives and property. And they sequester carbon, which is my special area focus in my research. So really interesting that mangroves are both threatened by climate change, but they're also one of our best allies in fighting climate change, as we'll discuss. So here, very quickly, I'll show you some carbon sequestration data in different ecosystems where we have a logarithmic scale on the y-axis, so that's really important to notice, of carbon burial and grams of carbon per unit area per year. And what this shows is that these ecosystems, what we call blue carbon ecosystems of salt marshes, mangroves, and seagrass beds, sequester about 100 times more carbon, or sequester carbon 100 times faster than these terrestrial forests. And that's because these ecosystems have sediments that are accumulating and that really help bury the organic matter and preserve it in the ground maybe for thousands of years. So these are really effective carbon sinks. So in light of climate change, destroying these ecosystems is really the last thing we should be doing, and yet that's what's happening around the world. So the good news is that it seems that mangrove deforestation rates have been slowing down in recent years, and so if you want to contribute to positive movement in this direction, what can you do about it? locally, you can support restoring coastal ecosystems, either with volunteering, getting out there yourself, restoring ecosystems, and promoting their use as sort of the green infrastructure that they are for coastal adaptation and resilience. And even if you don't live near mangroves, as I do, you can get into your local coastal ecosystem or other ecosystem, such as, for me, that's the salt marshes in Mission Bay, to help protect them and support their ecosystem services. So even if you live someplace without mangroves, you have something you can contribute to. Globally, there are lots of things you could do to reduce your ocean impact on ocean ecosystems, including reducing your carbon footprint, which again, climate change is impacting these ecosystems around the world. Reducing your plastic pollution can help make sites like this of really plastic impacted growth forests less common. And you can be an informed consumer, being careful not to consume goods that were made by destroying mangroves or other forests. But I'd like to end on a positive note. So look at this graph, which shows the top 15 countries ranked by their mangrove area around the world. And one hopeful piece of information from this is that 50% of the world's mangrove area, so if you see it goes down to here, is in just 6 countries. And 75% of global mangrove area is contained in just 15 countries. So what that means is that if just a few countries set really ambitious goals for protecting coastal environments and using them for climate change mitigation, the global mangrove deforestation problem would be essentially solved. And so what this requires is international support and pressure. And we have there's a process for this, which is through the United Nations, called the Paris Climate Agreement. And that's why it's so important that the president-elect has announced that the United States will rejoin the Paris Climate Agreement. And we have to keep calling on our elected officials to, regain American leadership in this sort of international push to fight climate change, including by protecting these ecosystems, which can be our best natural allies in fighting climate change. So with that, I'd just like to say thank you for listening.